Welcome to At the Core, the intersection between neuroscience and fitness, where I have the great opportunity to speak to high performance movers and learn more about their experiences in how they connect mindful movement. Today's guest is Dan Edwards. Dan is a founder and CEO of Parkour Generations, a multi-award winning and multinational organization for parkour, and has studied practical movement and physical fitness his entire life, with an elite background in fighting arts before finding parkour. Dan created the global recognized ADAPT parkour coaching qualification, which has been delivered in over 35 countries, as well as the Parkour Fitness Specialist certification and the worldwide Parkour for Schools program. Dan was also central to the creation and success of the world's first national governing body for the discipline, Parkour UK. His education programs have been accredited by numerous international bodies, and across a 20-year career in teaching and coaching, Dan has delivered courses, workshops, and events to tens of thousands of people in more than 30 countries, helping many go on to become certified parkour or fitness professionals themselves through his program. We will be continuing to watch a little bit more to understand what parkour is, the misunderstandings and the misgivings, how it relates directly to neuroplasticity, and how one can approach it at any age and at any level. So here's a little bit more through this video that you can understand what the body is capable and the fact that we have very few limits. Dan, I would like to welcome you to At the Core.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to start with one of the most common things for people that are not familiar with parkour. The misunderstanding that it is for teenage males that are hoodlums running around private property, reckless abandonment. And I couldn't be farther from that. You couldn't be farther from that. Anytime I had personal training with parkour, it was very deliberate, repetitive, conscientious. It always had a very huge mark on watching safety and alignment and repeating that and rinse and repeat constantly. So there was a quote by Aristotle that states, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit." And what most people don't know about parkour is everything outside of the 15 seconds of Instagram. Can you explain a little bit more about parkour to those unfamiliar?
Sure, yeah, and you're absolutely right in terms of those misunderstandings. Parkour is a discipline of movement and self-improvement through movement challenge, really. It came from France in the suburbs of Paris in the sort of late 80s, early 90s was when it was created. And it wasn't at all to do with, anarchy or anti-establishment stuff or showing off, because this was long before YouTube and Instagram and social media existed. It was a group of young people who wanted to sort of explore their limits and find out what they could do, explore their environment, and experience their freedom in an predominantly urban setting in the suburbs of Paris. So it was very much about this sort of self-knowledge, this search for self-knowledge. And that was the origin of parkour. That was what it was like when I found it, because I'm old. I found it, before YouTube existed or whatever. So that was how I encountered it, and that's how we've continued to teach it and spread it around the world. The media obviously really likes the spectacular angle and the sort of the stunt potential of it. So that's why on Instagram, social media, and the movies and that, it showcases this very high level athletic, sort of high risk, adrenaline type sport. It's showcased as that because it looks so spectacular when you can train at that level. But absolutely, that isn't. That's just the very, very tip of the iceberg. That's what you can do with parkour, and that's one thing that is done with it, a tiny thing. But that's just one product of a much deeper and more profound discipline, which is what we train and what we teach.
And I think what's interesting about parkour is that each body is different, each limb length is different. And so how you go about your obstacle, how you go about moving through your space is always going to be a very unique experience. And, you know, yes, there's body dimensions and skill set and even what your creative outlet allows you, what you are willing to experience and creatively go about in that obstacle course. There are also other things to analyze in how to approach parkour, and those would be considered timing, coordination, balance, speed, visual acuity, which a lot of people don't consider, and proprioceptive awareness, the idea of understanding where we are in space. How are those trained rather than just focusing on the jumps and walking on bars and swinging off of bars? How is the aspect of visual acuity, proprioceptive awareness, balance, which is our neural hierarchies, trained through parkour?
Yeah, and again, really good understanding there. That that's exactly right. So we have a saying in our programs of attributes before technique. So what we mean by that is that you should train and teach as a coach as well. You should teach this way, but when you're practicing, you should train to develop good physical and movement attributes rather than just trying to acquire techniques and skills. And the attributes that's our way of saying things like, strength, power, agility, mobility, coordination, balance, flexibility, precision, accuracy. You know, all these are the attributes and qualities of good movement. And if you focus your training around developing those things, as well as other concepts such as exploration and discovery and creativity and vision and these kind of things, if you train to develop those aspects, those principles and values and attributes, techniques will come very easily to you. So whereas if you train the other way around, if you train to learn techniques, not only in parkour, but in any discipline, if you just focus on individual techniques, you may develop those techniques, but you won't necessarily build a good, well-rounded body of attributes. So it will be harder for you to adapt to other things later. So in physical education terms, this is called, physical literacy rather than skill acquisition. And developing general physical literacy is definitely healthier and something you should definitely do first, especially as a young person, but you should also maintain the whole way through your life. And if you are a physically literate person, you will find it very easy to learn any skill or any technique from any sport or activity that you want to. So that's absolutely key, is training those things. How do we do it? We will use language around those things. So we help people understand that we are looking to develop this attribute here rather than this specific technique. We may use some of the techniques to train these attributes, but really we're getting them to understand this is what we want you to focus on developing, is speed or power or balance or adaptability or whatever. And the way we actually train them is through what is known as constraints-based learning or task-oriented training, we sometimes call it, which is we tend to, the way parkour was born, and this is how we still teach it, is we give people movement challenges and movement problems to solve. And then in the solving of that problem, they may utilize a technique or they may create their own technique, but the problem will require a number of attributes to be able to solve. It might require a lot of strength or a lot of endurance or a lot of balance or a lot of flexibility. And they will have to find a way to use their body and whatever attributes they possess to solve that problem. And that generally creates a more adaptive, capable mover than someone that simply focuses on technique. I certainly think building those attributes is hugely important. But the practice of parkour in itself, which is effectively, if you strip it down to its most utilitarian base, it's really just functional locomotion patterns for a human being. Running, jumping, crawling, climbing, swinging, vaulting, rolling, dropping. These are just foundational locomotion patterns that get us from A to B in any environment. If you get a human being to do lots of that, and just that, then they will develop really good functional strength, good agility, good mobility, good proprioception, good coordination, good balance, good control of fear, because this is exactly what the body and brain has evolved to do. So we're just giving it the movement nutrition that the brain, particularly the brain, wants. And if you give the body that, you end up with a good mover, which is why cultures that are, older than ours and less, let's say, industrialized, less dependent on technology, those cultures are often very fit, healthy individuals for, the whole of their life, into their 70s, 80s, 90s, even into their over a century of age. They will stay fit and healthy and active because they've been just following these movement patterns, these foundational movement patterns their whole life. Never seen a gym, never had any understanding about nutrition patterns or anything, but they're what known as blue zones, I suppose, these people, and they're generally the healthiest human beings there are. So, and all they're doing is following natural movement patterns, which is what we do in parkour. In parkour, we've just taken it to another level, I suppose, by training it, as you say, very rigorously and bringing in real discipline to that and repetition and iteration. And that has allowed us to sort of explore the human potential for movement, which I think parkour is showcasing a new understanding of human movement potential in many ways.
That's amazing. So I'm going to go back a little bit. You mentioned about this physical literacy, and you talked about giving challenges. And with neuroplasticity, or this idea of brain change, the best way to create and fire new neurons is for play, exploration, as you said, and challenges, learning, growing, and then ultimately succeeding at it and learning something new. And we always say that neuroplastic change takes place just outside your comfort zone, but within your capable zone.
Yes.
And to work within that smaller sphere, constantly pushing our boundaries. So obviously parkour does this. How do you do this in a way? How do you approach parkour as a whole, where you're very much outside your comfort zone, but understanding as your own athlete, as your own body, what's within your capable zone?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's exactly right. The band of growth in any discipline for a human being is a thin band that is a relationship between your level of skill and the level of difficulty of the challenge. And if you can keep people in that band, so it's not too difficult where it becomes overly frustrating, and it's not too easy where it becomes just a comfort zone and they're just easily repeating it. If you can keep them in that band where they have to stay focused and they have to unite all of their faculties, their thinking, as well as their physicality, as well as their perception and all these things. You have to bring in all these faculties together, body and mind and spirit, I suppose. If you can keep someone in that band where they need all those things, that's where they're more likely to enter the flow state, and that is where you're more likely to see growth. That's the optimal learning state for the human brain, right? So we do that by first of all assessing where someone is at the moment, and then providing a scaled structure of challenges in whatever field we're working on that day with them. It could be a jump challenge, it could be a climbing challenge, it could be a flow challenge, it could be a physical endurance challenge, whatever. It could be a complexity challenge. But we would scale those challenges in terms of difficulty, which is often done through complexity, to progress them gradually. So and only when they've achieved one and that then becomes their comfort zone, then do we stretch them into the next one. But we're always stretching them in some way in every session, because you're exactly right. Without that stretching, there won't be any growth. So we're always looking to stretch them. And the fact is that the human being, you are effectively what we are, is a very complex system of systems, right? So we've got multiple systems in the human body, and they all interact all of the time, and the brain governs the whole lot. But we're a very complex organism, and the only way to feed a complex organism in terms of growth is to provide it with complex stimuli and complex challenges.
Yes.
So if you simplify everything it's exposed to, it actually dumbs it down, because the organism is no longer being fed what it wants. So it won't grow, it won't get any stronger. It'll actually get more limited and more stupid and worse. So parkour is a really, because it's self-scaling, because especially with kids, because they typically don't choose to do things that are way beyond their comfort zone, because kids kind of naturally listen to their fear in a very sensible way, most kids. Because it's self-scaling like that, it's a great way for people to constantly come up against a challenge, but a challenge they can probably overcome if they stick at it. And so you see this regular daily pattern of being pulled out of your comfort zone, fighting hard to complete the challenge, completing the challenge, resting, and then the next day starting again. And that's why there's been such rapid growth in parkour, and not only parkour, but a lot of the lifestyle sports, such as skateboarding and motocross and wingsuiting or whatever. They've seen, astronomical, meteoric growth in terms of what they're doing. And it's because of this constantly stepping out of the comfort zone and constantly being pulled into that flow state, and needing to be in that flow state to be able to perform it. And that's a huge difference, is that parkour and, motocross, wingsuiting, whatever, all these kind of, let's say, potential high consequence activities, right? Because they're not more dangerous than other sports statistically. They're not high risk, but they look as if there's a high consequence. These activities, while you can be in flow playing any sport, you can be in flow playing football or tennis or playing chess. While you can be in flow doing those things, you don't need to be in flow to do those things. But to do parkour regularly, you need to be in flow to be able to do it, and keep yourself, bump free and bruise free. It requires you to be in flow. So it's pushing you into flow more of the time, which is probably why the acceleration of progression in our discipline has been so ridiculously quick. If you look back over the last 20 years,
it's amazing.
What athletes are doing now is 10 years ago, we even as parkour practitioners, 10 years ago, we would not have thought it was possible to do what practitioners are doing now. It's quite incredible. And that I think is down to that flow state, and the complex. To come back to your original question, the putting complex challenges in front of people continuously and asking them to solve it, and not holding their hand too much through it. Letting their brain figure it out and go through the ugly stage of being frustrated by it for a bit, but working through it and then getting it. That's very important.
I remember I would have this constant cycle taking place with my coach. And I remember this one specific instance of learning to jump off of something. And it started with learning the shoulder roll. And then, that was for a while. And then on this one specific day, that comfort zone, capable zone, working in that bandwidth expanded and changed so quickly in that 40 minutes.
Yes.
But he said, okay, so we're going to jump off this 1 foot high block, and you're going to land and you're going to shoulder roll out of it. And I was scared out of my mind. I don't know how standing on a 1 foot block and jumping off of it, but then having to roll out of it, was just so outside my comfort zone, within my capable zone, far outside my comfort zone. And so I did it. I squealed a little bit like a pig as I was jumping down, and it was like, oh, it happened, and I'm fine. I'm unscathed. It was not that big of a deal. I don't know why I thought it was a big deal. And so 2 more repetitions, and my coach put me on the 2 foot block, and 2 more repetitions, he put me on the 4 foot block, and 2 more repetitions, he put me on the 6 foot wall, and then it became the 8 foot wall. And within 15 minutes, I was doing, having to run up the 14 foot wall and step up and jump off the 16 foot wall. And again, I got up there and I was like, I shouldn't be doing this. And he was like, how is this any different? It's a different height. It's a different distance. The technique is all the same. And it was going through those steps and working through those steps. And it was amazing. It was an amazing feeling of accomplishment. It was an amazing feeling realizing that just 20 minutes ago, what I thought was my capable space was completely different. And it was really, really interesting how it all changed.
Yeah, it's and you're not the only one to experience that. We all experienced that when we came to parkour, I think, and everyone does now when they come in. They typically will look at the beginning of the session or the beginning of the class. They will kind of when the coach tells them what they're going to be doing, a lot of people will sort of be like, no, there's no way I'm going to do that. By the end of the class, they're doing it, comfortably as a training drill. And then they sort of look back and check that and go, wow, 2 hours ago, I didn't think I could do that at all. And I could do it quite comfortably. And the reality is that the potential that human beings have for movement is far, far, far beyond, for the majority of humans, unless you're one of the elite athletes pushing the boundaries. The majority of humans are nowhere near using their full movement potential. Nowhere near. Like the hardware and the software that we have for movement as a human being is incredible and is the most adaptive hardware and software of any animal in the world, which is why we dominated the planet and managed to live in every type of terrain and environment. So we're incredibly adaptive organisms, and we in the city, in the modern world, certainly in the industrialized world, we don't use any of it. We let technology do everything for us. So people are just not aware of what their potential is, and what they're, not only their potential, but what they're actually capable of already. Even before going to like, what are you potentially capable of if you train? But what you're capable of now is vastly beyond what you think, what most people think. So parkour, really, the first step, what it does for most people is just make them realize that, okay, I have a body that can do incredible things. And then once they reach the limit of that, then it's a question of, well, how far do you want to take it? Like, what do you want to do with it now? But you can do, absolutely amazing things. And you can look at
a lot of
disciplines to see that as well, not just parkour.
Well, and a lot of that limit is because of fear. So, I have 2 branches to this question. One is, how do we approach that? And I think a lot of it has been discussed, of course. As you drill these exercises, you're given these smaller levels. That's how one aspect we deal with fear. If you have any other thoughts on that, but also having gone through it, not succeeding, thinking it was in your capable zone and failing, hurting yourself, and having to psychologically, not just physically, rehab to approach that again. How does one go about that in parkour?
So there's both very good questions. The fear question is something, I'm hugely into the science of fear and the study of that, and the embodied practice of fear, let's say, which in some ways parkour is a good example of an embodied practice of fear. But and as you say, probably the best remedy for fear is exactly what therapists use for fear, which is microdosing. So we expose people to fear in a small way regularly.
Yeah, that threat inoculation.
Yeah, exactly. And then eventually they get used to it and it goes away. It stops being something they're afraid of. So that is part of it. So we will gradually, if someone comes and they're afraid of heights, we'll start them off, on a one, as you did, 1 foot block, a 2 foot block, a 3 foot block. And bit by bit, they get used to being at height, and the fear of heights goes away. So one element is microdosing. A second element dealing with fear is just starting to understand and reframe fear and realizing that it's not a negative thing. It's just an emotion, the same as all your other emotions. And you have to engage with it the same as you're encouraged to engage with all your other emotions, not suppress it. So you have to spend time with it and face it and, try and understand it. What is it trying to tell me, this emotion? What's it shouting at me for? And once you listen to it and then start to talk back to it in a strange way, then it starts to back off, because it's just there, like all emotions. It's just there as a kind of a warning system in response to your environment. So, or something that's happening at that stage. So as long as you acknowledge it and say, thanks for the warning, but I've got this and I feel comfortable with it. I've got the strength, I've got the skill, I'm all good. Then the fear often calms down. So it's about creating a relationship and a dialogue with fear, and getting people to understand that it's not a bad thing. Fear, it's just an emotion. It's neither bad nor good. It's just something that is and if you understand that, it's a very useful tool. So that's the first step, is we try and reframe people's understanding of fear, and then we get them to experience it fairly regularly so they can microdose. The second one, injuries and things like that. Yes, I mean, of course, if you're using the body in any way vigorously for any sport, any discipline, any athletic pursuit, there is the chance that you're going to fall over every now and again. You're going to get hurt. Accidents happen. You make mistakes. Sometimes you push too hard, too far. Sometimes there are emotional reasons why you get hurt. Whatever. whatever the reasons, at some stage, if you're getting serious about using your body, you're going to find some niggles, some bruises, some injuries, some overuse stuff, whatever. And again, our approach to that is to help people understand that all that is feedback. All injury is feedback. That's it. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just feedback. It's feedback on what you did, and it didn't have an outcome that you wanted. It didn't have an optimal outcome that you intended. What? And the question then is, use that feedback. Why? What is it trying to tell you? So, for example, if your knees start hurting after years of running, you know, you can complain about it and go, oh, God damn it, I'm going to try and, you know, I need to get better shoes or whatever. The best thing to do is to go, all right, this is feedback. My body is trying to tell me, my brain rather, because pain is a brain thing, right? My brain is trying to tell me that what I'm doing is suboptimal. So obviously my running technique is wrong, or the surface I'm running on is wrong, or the amount of running I'm doing is wrong, but something is wrong. And the pain is just my brain saying, oh, you need to attend to this, you need to listen to this, and you need to change it. So it's just feedback. So don't beat yourself up about it. Don't beat your body up about it. Don't get angry about it. It's feedback. An acute injury, say you miss a jump and you crack your shin or whatever, very common in parkour when you're starting out. Again, you can scream and shout and blame yourself or blame the wall or whatever. But the reality is, okay, that's feedback. Something that I'm doing is not quite right. Either I don't have the skill yet to be doing a jump that accurately, or I don't have the consistency yet to be repeating it that well, or I don't have the strength to land it, safely, or whatever. But it's giving you some sort of feedback, and that feedback is gold dust. So we actually see injuries in a way in a positive light, because they've always got a very important message for you that you should listen to. And sometimes it's not just physical. It's one of the most, in my experience, I mean, I've taught martial arts and parkour now for like 30 years, I suppose, starting with martial arts and then parkour. And I've trained them at a pretty high level for the same amount of time or longer. And my experience now, when people get injured, is that almost always it's a psychological thing or an emotional thing, rather than a physical kind of just a random physical thing. It's normally, if you dig deep enough, there's normally some kind of psychological reason behind that fall or that long-term injury they've got or something like that. And digging into that will normally provide you the solution. To give an example, if someone falls down in a class, and it's quite common, you might see someone training in a class and they miss a jump and they get hurt. And you go over to them, you say, okay, what happened there? And they'll say, oh, I just missed a jump. You go a bit deeper and say, well, why did you miss the jump? And they'll be like, well, I wasn't really concentrating. Why weren't you concentrating? Well, my girlfriend left me today. Okay, now we're getting to the reason of why you got injured. It wasn't that you just missed the jump, it's that you were training while in an emotionally distracted state. And that is the cause of your injury. So the feedback is, don't train when you're emotionally distracted. That's the feedback. Right. And that is super powerful. I think once people start to understand that, they listen to their bodies much more, they train much more sensibly, and they're much more holistic approach, and they're far less likely to get injured.
So you find, I mean, I have that question, right? There's always things, there's always distractions. There's always, as you talk about getting into this flow state, injuries do happen, especially at these high levels. I realized with some of the injuries that I have had, it's very true. It's exactly that. Either it was the combination of I wasn't actually prepared for it, or most commonly my injuries were due to exhaustion. I should have stopped 15 minutes before I did, and I didn't. I was having a good time, and that was when the injury happened. It was usually exhaustion and not paying attention to it. Or, one of the injuries I had, it was a move I've done a million times, and it wasn't something that I should have had any trouble with, but we were playing tag. And so I was moving at a faster clip than I thought I could. I felt this inclination. Maybe it was as simple as ego to have to, move faster. And suddenly I got injured. And it is very interesting. And knowing it, I knew it, the psychological aspect of, do I return? Do I return to that sport? Because can I shed myself of those issues? Can I shed myself of those emotional constraints to keep myself from getting injured in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's it's really good that you're able to observe that about yourself. And the key one there is ego. If I was to pinpoint anything as the leading cause of injury in any sport or physical activity, I would say it's people's egos. That's what causes them to get injured. And in parkour, for example, it's when people are showing off for the camera, or for their kind of get the best Instagram video, or showing off because there's they're a guy and there's a good-looking girl watching, or they're just trying to impress their mates or whatever. The amount of times people get injured for that reason, and you can then say, oh, it's because of the skill, or da-da-da. It's not. It's because of your ego. You're trying stuff you're not ready to do, and the ego is driving that. So deal with the ego, and all these injuries will go away, because you won't be in this weird state of mind where you have to show off. So in order to come back to something, it really doesn't matter whether you come back to it or not. What matters is, have you dealt with this is an opportunity to deal with the root problem, which is the ego and or the emotional issues that you've got going on. This is just a mirror on those, and giving you an opportunity to look at those, put them in the spotlight and deal with them. And if you deal with them, it doesn't matter if you go back to that sport or not. You go off and do something else. But probably if you deal with them, you will then go back to that sport, because you'll have nothing holding you back from doing it. So getting back on the horse, that old phrase, is a sensible thing. But it's not. You shouldn't just get back on the horse. It shouldn't just be about, well, I'm just going to keep training. It should be, well, hang on, let's reflect a bit on what caused that, because there could be something really important to learn from that will prevent you doing it again. And the thing is, if you get back on the horse and you don't deal with the root cause, probably it's just a matter of time before you get injured again. Which is what happens. And the body is or the world, the experience of life, whatever you want to say is the cause of this. But it's pretty ruthless about that. If you don't get the message the first time, it will give you a harder lesson and a harder lesson and a harder lesson until you finally get the message. So it's better to learn it the first time and be done with it.
So I am, my experience was the only female with 400 guys in an indoor parkour gym. I was easily a decade older than the male average. You, however, have managed to grow probably the largest female audience and practitioners in the world. And I will not say that lightly by saying you have the most women in the world. I've seen some of the Women London events that have taken place, and that's about as more girls that I've ever seen do parkour, on any given random day or time at the gym that I had gone to.
Right.
Do you train them differently, mentally, physically? Is there a difference based on that?
So I personally I wouldn't say I have a specific, as a coach, I wouldn't say I have a specific paradigm that's different for male and female practitioners or whatever. I tend to see human beings as people first, and as sex or gender kind of a distant second. But they're human beings first, and human beings have far more in common with each other than they do difference. So if you understand the psychology generally of human beings and how humans learn, so the science of learning and therefore the science of teaching, then you can pretty much just create a good teaching paradigm that will work for every human being, which is effectively a feedback loop. You just look to create feedback loops, right? So it's just about what's the best feedback loop for this individual human, for this person, and their psychological state. So I don't necessarily have a difference between teaching men and women. However, there are reasons why groups of women might want to train together amongst only women, and actually that was pretty integral early on, 15 years ago, to creating the amazing women's parkour scene that we have, was creating environments where women could go and train only with other women, because that broke down a lot of the sort of barriers to entry that women saw, especially adult women, where they thought exactly what you experienced. I don't want to go along and do something with those 16-year-old boys. Whereas they knew if they went to this class or this event, there would only be their peer group there. Then suddenly you had hundreds of women joining the training. And then once that community had built up, they then easily transitioned across into the other classes. And now we have roughly 50% male and female in every class, which is awesome, right? So just as many women that want to train as there are men, there were just far more barriers to entry, and in terms of their perception. So we just try to make it more inclusive. Some coaches do kind of have a slight difference in how they approach it, and obviously there are some differences anatomically between men and women. So some movements men are going to naturally move towards, and some movements women are going to naturally move towards, and therefore you might have a system that kind of in the early sessions encourages this use of their strengths, because that builds confidence, and success breeds success, right? So you want them to succeed early. So you might give women practitioners more balance challenges, for example, because women typically are better at balance than men when they begin, because they have a lower center of gravity and all that sort of stuff. So that will make them feel very confident. They can suddenly achieve this balance stuff, and they can see the men can't do it as well, and they'll suddenly be like, this is awesome. So you give them more of that and they succeed, and then you introduce everything else. Men, for example, their strength is more in their chest and shoulders, upper body. So they're better at pulling themselves over things and climbing stuff. And they've got, a lot of power. So especially young men. So they like to use their power and do big jumps. So you give a little bit of that to them, a little bit of power and strength based stuff. And that hooks them. And then later on, you might introduce the more kind of, let's say, sophisticated stuff like balance and the flow and all that sort of stuff, which the women might take to more naturally than the men. So there might be some reasons why anatomically, you kind of go, well, they're slightly different, and therefore let's give them different things at different times. But on the whole, the differences in the methods are far smaller than the similarities. And we've seen so many good women practitioners come through the training, and they go on to coach, and they don't coach very differently from the men. Some of them are way tougher than the men as coaches, way harder. But yeah, they don't necessarily have a different system. Psychologically, there are some differences, obviously, between a man coaching and a woman coaching. So, and a woman coach is probably more likely to understand some of the needs of a woman practitioner, and vice versa. So, and that's normal and perfectly natural. But as a coach, again, it's more, whether you're a male coach, female coach, whatever, it's like you must be able to coach everyone. So if you're a man and you can only coach men, you're a bad coach. If you're a woman and you can only coach women, you're a bad coach. I mean, you need to be able to coach everyone. So understand there are psychological differences, broad psychological differences, but the similarities far outweigh the differences.
So bringing it back to neuroscience, the thalamus, I consider the grand central station for the brain. It's where all information is passed through and relayed to the cortices. The cortices, the cortical activation will always tap into some portion of the thalamus, and it's a very unique anatomy of its own within the brain. And oftentimes we see that the weakened thalamus, or a less developed, less integrated thalamus, would lead to chronic pain, shows up in neurological movement disorders such as Parkinson's or tics like Tourette syndrome. And yet it has been shown in many white paper studies that obstacle training enhances and improves the thalamus. So my question to you is, for that individual that has Parkinson's, the age group of the 40 plus, even the 70 plus, whether they're going to be doing these, 10-foot gaps, 6 feet high and all this kind of stuff, how do they incorporate a sense of the parkour methodology into their fitness training, into their wellness training, to improve brain health function and overall physical development?
It's again, great question, and it's something that we have really loved doing. So we did, before the pandemic, we did a lot of work with a guy called Carl Sterling, who is a Parkinson's regeneration expert. So we did a lot of sessions and workshops where we would use parkour. We called it Parkour for Parkinson's, where we would use parkour sessions for people with Parkinson's to strengthen their movement skills. And to give them, again, enough complexity that it would start to sort of, retrain the brain in terms of movement, or at least restore some of the movement capacities they had. And they were very successful. So we're at the moment, in the stage of developing that system. It was put on hold because of the pandemic, really, but we were seeing a lot of results of it. And Carl, who I should definitely connect you with, he's a great authority on that stuff, and he absolutely immediately recognized the benefits of parkour for those neural reasons, exactly as you're describing. And the reason is and the way you do it is actually quite simple, which is that again, it comes down to what is the type of nutrition that the brain wants. What did it evolve to do? The brain evolved in movement terms. It evolved to move us over and across terrain safely, variable terrain, in order to get us from one place to another, right? To eat or to breed or for shelter or whatever. But basically, that's what the body is for, is to get from one place to another and to adapt to variable terrain and the needs of that terrain. So if you give the brain that, it responds to it incredibly quickly, because that's what it's looking for. That's what it's designed to do. So if you give it that nutrition, it will respond, and the complexity is about the right level for it in terms of spatial awareness of having to adapt to obstacles, even if they don't have to be. For the parkour of Parkinson's, there's nothing at all height, and there's nothing crazy at all. It's simply a case of putting obstacles in the path that they have to negotiate, either through gripping bars and pulling themselves around them, or lowering themselves down and going under something, or finding a way to climb over a low box and doing that in a circuit so they string them together. You'd be amazed at the beginning of the session, a lot of these participants will have trouble doing the most basic movement skills. But by the end of the session, they're moving through this route, climbing around stuff, going under stuff, going over stuff, walking along thin obstacles to balance, thinner obstacles to balance. And very quickly they adapt to it. And that's because that's what their brain is evolved to do. And it has been probably starved of that for most of, not only most of their adult life, because they won't have done that. Most adults don't do that sort of stuff. But also, especially since they started to degenerate, that stuff's been taken away from them even more. So the degeneration happens quicker. So you've got to put that stuff back in, and again, these cultures, the blue zone cultures, and these sort of other the pre-industrial societies, they have very little cases of this sort of stuff, because their brain is always moving and always being challenged and always being stimulated in that movement sense. So it always stays good at movement. It's always given the nutrition for it. So it's an incredibly good tool to counter that stuff. But the best tool to counter it is to not stop doing it. Like, you do it naturally as a kid, you go and play, but then as adults, we stop doing anything like that. We stop playing, and we don't hunt either. We don't, we don't gather, we don't fight, we don't do any of the stuff that the body is designed to do. So the best solution is just keep that stuff going, and then you're much less likely to have those neural problems later in life.
Right. And this is amazing. I know we just barely scratched the surface, and though we hit so many of these points. So I'm going to take it to a little bit of a lighter round, which I call my lightning round. And I have questions for you, and it's going to be off the top of your head. What comes to mind first?
Okay, I'm scared. Okay.
All right. So are you ready?
Yes.
Working out, morning, afternoon, or night?
Afternoon.
Sweet or salty?
Sweet.
Planks or squats?
Squats.
Shoes or barefoot?
Barefoot.
Coffee or tea?
Both.
Beach or mountains?
Mountains, for sure.
Music or silence?
Both.
Heat or cold?
Cold.
Inside or outside?
Outside.
Jasmine or peppermint?
Jasmine.
Spontaneous or planned?
Planned spontaneity.
Learn something new or perfect something known?
Perfect something new, probably.
All right. Dan, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to open it up to you. Is there anything you would like to share with the audience? Any information about your programs, things you're working on, or anything we didn't touch on that you thought was important for the audience to know?
I'd probably just bring it back to sort of what you said about your ratio of 1 in 400 thing, which is to remind people and to encourage them that what we do, parkour and movement and play, it's just really a serious form of play. What we do is for everyone. It's definitely not just for kids. It's definitely not just for young male athletes. Parkour is just about refining and improving and enjoying your movement wherever it's at, wherever you start from. It's about beginning that journey. And absolutely anyone can do that. As long as you're breathing and alive, anyone can do that and can engage with it. So if anyone's out there listening to this thinking, oh, parkour was never for me and I love watching it, but I don't want to do it, throw that thinking out and go and train, go and find a community. Most communities around the world are incredibly inclusive, incredibly welcoming. But even if you haven't got a community, just go outside and start exploring your space, seeing what your body and your brain can achieve. Remember what it was like to be a kid. What would you have done as a kid? And then build a bit of that back into your training and your daily movement routines. And you will see a benefit. You see a huge benefit. So it's absolutely for everyone. And we want that kind of 1 in 400 thing to go away and for it to be much more everyone to be able to experience what we experience here, which is that, parkour's for everyone and you can have all different types in a class.
This has been amazing, eye-opening, encouraging, and almost, titillating to want to get out there myself. Hopefully all of you listening, you realize that it is for you absolutely 100%, regardless of your skill set, your age. There is no limitations because movement is for everyone. And Dan, thank you so much. Thank you for joining At the Core.
Thank you very much, Misha. It's been an absolute pleasure.